The Principles of Economics by Carl Menger. Chapter 5. The Theory of Price. Section 3. Price Formation and the Distribution of Goods under Bilateral Competition. Part A. The Origin of Competition. We would interpret the concept of the monopolist too narrowly if we limited it to persons who are protected from the competition of other economizing individuals by the state or by some other organ of society. There are persons who, as a result of their property holdings or due to special talents or circumstances, can market goods that it is physically or economically impossible for other economizing persons to supply competitively, and even where special circumstances of these types are not present, there is often no social barrier to the emergence of monopolists. Every artisan who establishes himself in a locality in which there is no other person of his particular occupation, and every merchant, physician, or attorney who settles in a locality where no one previously exercised his trade or calling is a monopolist in a certain sense, and since goods he offers to society in trade can, at least in numerous instances, be had only from him. The chronicles of many a flourishing town tell of the first weaver to settle there, when the place was still small and poorly populated. Even today a traveler can find this particular kind of monopolist everywhere in Eastern Europe, and in the smaller villages even in Austria. Monopoly interpreted as an actual condition and not as a social restriction on free competition is therefore as a rule the earlier and more primitive phenomenon, and competition the phenomenon coming later in time. Anyone wishing to expound the phenomena prevailing under competition will therefore find it to his advantage to begin with the phenomena of monopoly trade. The manner in which competition develops from monopoly is closely connected with the economic progress of civilization. The increase of population, the increased needs of various economizing individuals, and their growing wealth drive the monopolist in many instances, even while increasing production, to exclude progressively larger classes of the population from consuming the monopolized good, and permit him at the same time to drive his prices higher and higher. Society thus becomes a progressively more favorable object for his monopolistic policy of exploitation. A first artisan of any particular kind, a first physician or a first lawyer, is a welcome man in every locality. But if he encounters no competition, and the locality flourishes, he will, almost without exception, after some time, acquire the reputation of a hard and self-seeking man among the less wealthy classes of the population, and even among the wealthier inhabitants of the place he will be regarded as selfish. The monopolist cannot always comply with the growing requirements of society for his commodities or labor services, and if he could comply, the corresponding increase of his sales is not always in his economic interest. In most cases, therefore, he will be driven to make a choice between his clients, and some of the competitors for his monopolized good will either get nothing or will be supplied with it only reluctantly and inadequately. Even his wealthier clients will often find cause to complain of negligence of all sorts and of all the costliness of his services. The economic situation just described is usually such that the need for competition itself calls forth competition, provided there are no social or other barriers in the way. Our next task, then, will be to investigate the effects of the appearance of competition upon the distribution, sales, and price of a commodity, in comparison with the analogous phenomena observed under monopoly. Part B. The effect of the quantities of a commodity supplied by the competitors on price formation. The effect of the given prices set by them on sales, and in both cases the effect on the distribution of the commodity among the competing buyers. To facilitate comprehension, I shall utilize the case with which I illustrated my explanation of the principles of monopoly trades as the basis of the present investigation. In the table in the previous section, B1, B2, B3, etc. represent individual farmers or groups of farmers. To each farmer, a first newly acquired horse is the equivalent of the quantity of grain appearing in the first column, and each additional horse is the equivalent of a quantity of grain 10 bushels less. The question before us is, what will be the influence of larger or smaller quantities of a commodity offered for sale by several competing sellers on the price and on the distribution of the commodity among the competitors for it. To begin with, assume that there are two competitors in supply, A1 and A2, and that together they have 3 horses for sale, A1 having 2 horses and A2 having 1. From what was said earlier, it is clear that in this case farmer B1 will have 2 horses and farmer B2 1 horse. The price will be between 60 and 70 bushels of grain, a higher price being impossible because of the economic interest of the 2 farmers B1 and B2, and a lower price because of the competition of B3. If A1 and A2 have 6 horses for sale, it is no less certain that B1 will purchase 3 of them, B2 2 of them, and B3 1 of them, and that the price will be between 50 and 60 bushels of grain. If we compare the price and the distribution of goods resulting from the sale of a given quantity of a commodity by several competing sellers with the situation observed under monopoly, we find a complete analogy. Whether a given quantity of a commodity is sold by a monopolist or by several competitors in supply, and independent of the way in which the commodity was originally distributed among the competing sellers, the effect on price formation and on the resulting distribution of the commodity among the competing buyers is exactly the same. Although the larger or smaller quantity of a good sold has a very decisive influence on its practice and distribution under monopoly as well as competitive trade, the fact that a particular quantity of a commodity is supplied by a monopolist alone or by several competitors in supply has no influence on the phenomena of economic life just mentioned. We can observe a similar result where commodities are offered for sale at given prices. The higher or lower level of the price has, as we saw, a very important influence on the total sales of a commodity, as well as the quantity that each competing buyer will actually acquire. But whether the goods at the fixed price are brought to market only by one or several economizing individuals has no direct and necessary influence either on the total sales or on the quantities that will be acquired by the various economizing individuals. The principles developed with respect to the influence of given quantities of a monopolized commodity offered for sale on its price, with respect to the influence of given prices on the quantities sold, and in both cases also with respect to its distribution among the various competitors attempting to buy it, are therefore fully applicable to all cases where a number of economizing individuals, competitors in demand, compete for quantities of a commodity offered for sale by several other economizing individuals, which are competitors in supply. Part C. The effect of competition in the supply of a good on the quantity sold and on the price at which it is offered. The policies of competitors. I have just explained that for each particular quantity of a good offered for sale, a definite price is established, that at any set price there is a definite amount of sales, that in both cases there is also a definite distribution of the goods sold, and that it is irrelevant in these respects whether the quantity involved is marketed by a monopolist or by several competitors in supply. Other things being equal, the price and distribution of a good will be the same whether 1,000 units of it, for example, are offered for sale by a monopolist or by several competitors in supply. Whether a commodity is offered for sale by a monopolist or by several competitors at a given price, at 3 units of some other commodity for 1 unit of the commodity being offered for sale, for example, the total sales and the distribution of the quantity sold among the various competing buyers will be exactly the same. If, therefore, competition in supply is to exercise any effect at all on price formation, total sales, and the distribution of a good among its competing purchases, either different quantities of the good must be offered for sale, or the competing seller must find themselves obliged to set different prices under the regime of competition in supply than under monopoly. The influence of competition in the supply of a commodity on the quantities offered for sale, on its distribution, and on the prices at which it is offered, is the topic with which we shall be occupied in what follows. To set the economic phenomena involved clearly before us, let us consider the simple case in which the quantity of a monopolized good available to a monopolist suddenly comes into the hands of 2 competitors. A monopolist has died and has left his holdings of the monopolized goods and means of production to two heirs in equal shares. This instance of the simple case just posited, it is not impossible that the two heirs of the monopolist will, instead of competing with each other, operate as associates in a single firm, and carry on the monopoly policy of their testator. Or they may enter into a mutual understanding to exploit the consumers, and together regulate the quantities of the good they offer for sale, or prices they set. It is even conceivable that they may, without an express understanding, but in their mutual well-understood interest, pursue the same monopoly policy toward their customer, if they find it in their own economic interest. In each of these cases, which can be observed everywhere in the economic development of men, we would undoubtedly encounter the same phenomena that we observed earlier with monopoly trade. For the two economizing individuals would then not be competitors in supply, but monopolists, and so not within the present field of discussion. But if we suppose each of the two heirs to be determined to pursue the sale of the previously monopolized good independently, we have a case of real competition before us, and the questions to be considered are, what quantities of the previously monopolized good will now, in contrast to the previous situation, be offered for sale, and what supply prices will be set by the two competitors. In the previous section, we saw that this is frequently in the economic interest of the monopolist to abstain from marketing portions of the whole quantity of the monopolized good available to him, and to destroy them or let them spoil, since he can often obtain a larger profit from a smaller quantity of his goods than he would if he were to sell the entire available quantity at lower prices. Assume that a monopolist has 1,000 pounds of a monopolized commodity, that he can, in a given economic situation, either sell 800 pounds at 9 ounces of silver per pound, or dispose of the whole quantity available at 6 ounces of silver per pound. It is thus in his power to take 6,000 ounces of silver for the entire quantity of the monopolized commodity at his command, or to take 7,200 ounces of silver for 800 pounds of it. If the monopolist is an economizing individual pursuing his self-interest, the choice he will make is not subject to doubt. He will destroy 200 pounds of his monopolized commodity, permit them to spoil, or otherwise withdraw them from trade, and will offer only the remaining 800 pounds for sale, or, which amounts to the same thing, he will set his price at such a level that the same result will obtain. But if the 1,000 pounds of the previously monopolized commodity are divided between two competitors, this policy immediately becomes economically impossible for each of them. If one of the two were to destroy part of the quantity available to him, or if he were to withdraw it from trade in some other way, he would of course elicit a definite increase in the price of a unit of his commodity, but never, or only in very rare instances, would he be able to obtain a greater profit by doing so. If A1, for instance, the first of the two competitors, were to destroy 200 of the 500 pounds of the previously monopolized commodity at his command, or otherwise withdraw them from trade, he would doubtless cause the price of the good to rise from 6 to 9 ounces of silver per pound, for example, but he would not cause a greater total profit to accrue to himself. The consequence of this action would be that A2 would obtain 4,500 instead of 3,000 ounces of silver, while he himself would only obtain 2,700 ounces of silver instead of 3,000, in exchange for the other 300 units sold. The intended gain would accrue solely to his competitor, and he himself would suffer a substantial loss. The first effect, therefore, of the appearance of competition in supply is that none of the competitors selling the commodity can derive an economic advantage from destroying or withdrawing from exchange a part of the available quantity of the commodity, or, which amounts to the same thing, from leaving the means of production available for its production unused. A second phenomenon of economic life that is peculiar to monopoly is also removed by competition. I refer to the successive exploitation of the various social classes that was mentioned in the previous section. We saw that it can often be the advantage of a monopolist to market only small quantities of the monopolized good in the beginning at high prices, and to sell to classes of people of successively lower purchasing power only by degrees, in order to exploit all classes of people in a stepwise fashion. This procedure is immediately rendered impossible by competition. If A1 were to attempt a stepwise exploitation of the social classes of this sort in spite of the competition of A2 and market only small initial quantities of the good, he would probably not be able to raise the price sufficiently to elicit a gain for himself, but would instead only permit his competitor to fill the gaps created by his action and to capture the intended economic gain. Whatever else may be the effect of true competition on the distribution of goods and price formation, therefore, it is certain at any rate that two of the socially most injurious outgrowths of monopoly described earlier are removed by competition. Neither the destruction of part of the available quantity of a commodity subject to competition in supply, nor the destruction of a part of the factors serving for its production, is in the interest of separate competitors, and the successive exploitation of the various social classes becomes impossible. But competition has still another, much more important consequence for the economic life of men. I refer to the increase of the quantities of a previously monopolized commodity that become available to economizing men. Monopoly usually causes only part of the quantity of goods at the command of the monopolist to be offered for sale, or only a pan of the available means of production to be put to use. True competition always puts its malpractice to an immediate end. But competition usually has the further effect of increasing the available quantity of a previously monopolized commodity. It is a very rare occurrence, at any rate, for the means of production collectively at the command of two or more competing sellers to be as narrowly limited as those at the command of a monopolist. In the great majority of cases, therefore, several competitors will market a greater quantity of a commodity than a monopolist. Thus the existence of true competition not only causes the entire quantity of a commodity actually available to be offered for sale, but also has the further and much more important result of increasing significantly the quantity that becomes available when there is no natural limitation to the means of production. This means that more and more classes of society are able to consume the commodity at falling prices, and that the provisioning of society in general becomes ever more complete. In the preceding section I gave the reasons why a monopolist generally does not bring certain fixed quantities of his commodity to market and away the determination of the price as an auction, but instead sets a definite price for his commodity and awaits its effect on sales. A similar thing occurs when there are several competitors selling a commodity. In this case, too, each of them offers his commodity at a set price, which he computes so as to yield him the largest possible proceeds. What distinguishes his behavior from that of a monopolist is that the latter will often, as we have seen, find it to his interest to fix his prices so high that only a part of the quantity available to him reaches the consumer, while the competition forces every competitor to fix his price with regard to the entire quantity of his own and in his competitor's hands. Barring error and ignorance on the part of the economizing individuals involved, prices are therefore formed under the impact of the entire quantity at the disposal of all the competing suppliers. To this must be added the fact that competition generally considerably increases the available quantity of commodities, as we have seen. These are the factors that are responsible for the reductions in prices that are a consequence of competition. Even the direction of economic activity of the economizing persons engaged in the production of a good is powerfully affected by the existence of competition. A monopolist naturally endeavors to place the monopolized good only within the reach of the higher social classes, and to exclude all classes of society of lower purchasing power from consuming it. As a result, it is much more advantageous for him and always more convenient to obtain larger profits on smaller quantities than small profits on larger quantities. But competition, which concerns itself with the exploitation of even the smallest economic gain wherever possible, tends to descend with its goods to the lowest social classes, and the economic situation at any time permits. The monopolist has the power to regulate, within certain limits, either the price or the quantity of the monopolized good coming upon the market. He readily renounces the small profit that can be made on goods destined to be consumed by the poor social classes, in order to be able to exploit the classes of greater purchasing power more effectively. But under competition, where no single competitor has the power to regulate by himself either the price or the quantity of a good traded, each individual competitor desires even the smallest profit, and the exploitation of existing possibilities of making such profits is no longer neglected. Competition leads, therefore, to large-scale production with its tendency to make many small profits and with its high degree of economy, since the smaller the profit on each unit, the more dangerous becomes every uneconomic waste, and the brisker the competition, the less possible becomes an unthinking continuation of business according to old established methods.